Hi again, everyone. Welcome in to SEC Breakdown. This is our second week coming your way every Sunday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time with the very best talk surrounding SEC football. Bringing in today and for every week, Michael Ball from Last Word on Sports and also David Waters, who covers the SEC and specifically the Florida Gators. We also have a fourth, including Chad Neipling, who is with Fox Sports Arkansas. So it's going to be some collaboration between the four of us each and every Sunday, and we're looking still for a specific time spot, but we've had this group together in the past, and it's worked out extremely well. So we definitely enjoy the contributions of this group and invite you to join us each and every week for the best in SEC football talk. We would like to address, of course, David, this SEC football situation with Alabama starting at King of the Hill and winning another national championship. Unfortunately, it looks like Mike's having some internet issues today. But Alabama winning a fourth national championship under Nick Saban. This one, at least the best game of the four, is Clemson put up a good fight, 45-40. David, your thoughts about what appeared to be, in a national perspective, a bit of a slide for the Alabama dynasty for a couple of years. I don't know if that was necessarily fair, considering it took a kick six and it took an Ohio State team that was loaded to keep them out of national championship consideration the two previous years. But your thought about this dynasty reemerging here in 2015?
Yeah, it's not quite fair how consistent these guys are in the conference that is the SEC. You're not supposed to be able to do this, and ever since 2008, Saban's second year, they've had their hand in the SEC title game in a national championship race, season after season. And, and it's most of these teams kind of look the same every year. It's the same type of quarterback, not the superstar quarterback, but it's the quarterback that can get the job done and get the ball to the running backs and the playmakers that are the receivers there. And, of course, knowing Saban, it's that also the defense. You can always rely on Alabama having a great defense. It's guys who look like when they bring them in from high school, it looks like they're already ready to play in the NFL. Never mind the SEC. So it's, he brings these guys in and they're just bigger and faster than everyone else. And, they showed again, with Clemson, definitely, a type of offense they've struggled with in the past and again struggled with, but they did find a way to go come out and win that game. Saban come out and kind of surprise everybody with an onside kick late in the game that no one saw coming. And it's, you can see when Saban, you can see him evolving over time as well. I said when he come back and he brought Kiffin in to bring a more wide open offense, and now he's trying onside kicks in the fourth quarter, something we'd never think we'd seen from Saban. So I think the evolution of him as well, probably toward the end of his career, probably right now, seeing the evolution of him and still trying new things is what keeps him on top.
And it really is a mark of a great team when we talk about that most of the time, and this is true to Alabama's case, that they're imposing their will on the other team. But even when they can't, they can adjust the game plan, adjust the team. And that was not an Alabama game in the championship game against Clemson. That was not trademark Alabama football will on the other team. Play great defense, and let's shut down the other team and impose our will. They played a Clemson kind of football game. They had to be a little bit more wide open on offense. Obviously, their defense was gassed at certain times of the game. John Watson, as he gives fits to everyone across the country, no difference for Alabama, but they made enough plays and they were able to adjust their game and play that sort of 45-40 game and still win a national championship. Hopefully Mike's with us and can kind of give us his thoughts on this particular Alabama team and maybe how it compares to some of the other ones. And what do you thought about the performance in the championship game against Clemson? Maybe Mike didn't pick that up, David. So
don't think so.
Nick Saban took over in 2007. They get to a point where they're on the cusp of winning an SEC in 2008, only get shut out by a team that obviously won its own national championship. And then by 2009, they are the team and the gold standard in college football, and it's really not changed since then. Sure, you're not going to win every national championship, but like you say, even in the down years, they make the Final Four the last couple of years. Any particular team out of this run of defeating Texas in 2009, the team that got the payback win against LSU in New Orleans in 2011, of course, the team that completely overwhelmed Notre Dame, and it wasn't even as close as 42-14 in that game. And this team that survived a scare from Clemson after just completely dismantling Michigan State. Do you have any preference, any one of these four Saban championship teams, David?
I still got to go probably with the 2009 Greg McElroy at quarterback. Then you had a double-headed monster of a young Trent Richardson and then Mark Ingram, who won the Heisman that year. So that as far as Bama's teams go, I think that's the one I'll look at as they got to face Texas in the national championship game, and I guess they did. They call some people still say a little break when Colt McCoy went down with the injury in that game. But that was a really, really good Alabama team, and one that kind of ended the Urban Meyer Florida dynasty in the SEC championship game that year, and that was kind of the passing of the torch. There starting that year. I'm kind of partial to that team. I really think that was probably one of Saban's most hungry teams. It was early in his Alabama career, and like I said, there's always a stonewall defense you can just count on from Saban. But I would say that was probably the difference in this year's team. We've seen the stable of backs Alabama's had year after year, but they really, really relied on Derrick Henry more this year than they ever relied on more than one back, or when they've always relied on just on one back. I'm sorry, they've relied on more than one back in years previous, and they've really had Derrick Henry as their workhorse this year. And, it was kind of a change. And then I still say, I was talking about the evolution of Saban earlier, but also the evolution of Kiffin. He's come in these last 2 years and really probably, taking quarterbacks who probably shouldn't, be leading their teams to national championships, but he's getting the most out of these quarterbacks and, finding a way to get these quarterbacks the ball to the playmakers. And it's really something to see with Kiffin. I've really been impressed with him the last 2 years and how he's been able to use these quarterbacks and really just make something happen and get Alabama back in the playoff.
David, I find it kind of amusing, the whole who's the greatest coach argument. And in just looking at the two contemporaries with Urban Meyer and with Nick Saban, just last year, after Nick Saban was hands down considered, the perception was he's the best coach in college football, if not in the history of college football, because of that one game when Ohio State defeated Alabama, that suddenly Nick Saban, he's not the best, Urban Meyer's the best. And it's obviously a great discussion. And even now, based on what's happened this year, it's still, I don't think you just tally up championships and say that guy's the best because he's got a 4-3 advantage or whatever it is. And it's now 5-3 between Nick Saban and Urban Meyer. But I just thought it was hilarious that Nick Saban, the perception was he was the best, and then Urban Meyer won that one game. So for 60 minutes, Ohio State wins a game by a touchdown, and suddenly Nick Saban's not the best anymore. But now he's the best again. He is the best again, and nobody's going to argue that. They're two very different guys, but obviously extremely successful. And this one's not over. They still have a pretty good deal going up there at Ohio State, and most people would consider them to be the best team in the Big Ten and probably should have been in this playoff, and it might have been a little bit more interesting. But you obviously have a certain perspective on Urban Meyer from his years at Florida, including two national championships. So Urban Meyer, Nick Saban.
As you said, it's pretty difficult, and you're splitting hairs, especially in the world of college football. We always talk about the inequality of schedules and conferences, and now, you have to look at, I guess, the comparison is when Meyer was down here at Florida and Saban was at Alabama. But, as right now, the Big Ten, I just say, is, up at the top is just as every bit as good as the SEC. So, you have your top 3 or 4 teams, and all those top 3 or 4 teams in both conferences can sit there and win any game. So I think it's, like you said, it's splitting hairs. There's really no right way to make a decision on who's best. If you want to say Saban's the best right now because he just come off a national championship, I'm fine with that. And then we could also go back to last year when they met head-to-head and Urban Meyer won. So, it's apples and oranges. People can pick, and right now I wouldn't have a disagreement either way.
Yeah, Urban Meyer is 50-4 at Ohio State. That's not too bad. I believe that's the best winning percentage for any coach through what was the first 50 games when he was 47-3 at that point. How do you think this reflects on the rest of the SEC, David? Because of course, and I thought it was overblown at the end of last postseason because the league didn't win a championship for a second straight year. And the bowl play was a bit spotty. The SEC West underachieved, certainly against the better teams. The East generally played the lesser bowl games and won some games. And the league went 7-5 in postseason play, and that would be good enough for the other four conferences, it seems. But the SEC at a certain standard. Alabama wins this national championship. Is Alabama that far in front of the rest of the SEC that there's not a whole lot of comparison? Whether you're looking at this specific team against the other 2015 teams or even just as a program in general, is Alabama that much out in front of the rest of the conference?
Yes, and I've heard, Alabama is making college football boring. I've heard that argument. They're the program that is consistently at the top and, beating teams from any conference that comes their way, in national championship games, or BCS bowl games in the past. But I don't see people saying that about the NFL. The Patriots have been good since the early 2000s, and how is that bad for the NFL? But Alabama is being bad for college football. I guess, historically, of course, college football has had more parity in it, so maybe that's the argument there. But, it sets a dangerous precedent in the SEC. We saw with the Les Miles, debacle late in the season, how, if you're comparing yourself against Alabama, well, in the SEC, then everybody is a failure for the most part. And so you can't really sit there and compare teams to Alabama and make that the benchmark. You have to work your way up to it. Everything is cyclical in college football. It will eventually end. Saban will eventually retire, and if that's what it takes to get Alabama down, well, that's what it takes. Is somebody else really going to come up and beat them year after year? Not year after year. It's not going to happen. As long as Saban's at Alabama, the train's going to keep rolling. So you would think in the long run, it probably has made the SEC more of the country benchmark, and we've seen it along with the launch of the SEC network. We see Alabama time after time after time again, and they lead SEC network programming because Alabama's the hot team when the network launched. So it seems like it's never going to end. We get to hear the funniness and craziness of the Paul Feinbaum show every great now and then, and part of that's because this Bama Dynasty it's what's taken over at the same time as the SEC network and Paul Feinbaum. So it will end sometime. Believe me, it will. We have, Kirby Smart, who was a great Alabama assistant and just left and went to Georgia. Jim McElwain had 10 win seasons in his first year at Florida, who was another, Alabama disciple while Saban's there. And now, can LSU find a way to, rally the troops for Les Miles and probably as a make or break season? And Tennessee is on the rise again. So, there are programs that are going to give Alabama a run, but as Saban's there, it's definitely going to be difficult.
We'd like to remind everyone that this is SEC Breakdown. This is our second week here on Blab, 4 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday. We're still trying to figure out a specific time. So it's David Waters, who has covered the Florida Gators in the SEC for a number of platforms. Mike Loveall from Last Word on Sports, who's having a few technical difficulties, but we'll get Mike on here next week. And also Chad Neipling from Fox Sports Arkansas. And we appreciate you jumping on board with us here. So we will break down what appears again to be the best conference in college football each and every week, at least once a week. And we appreciate your comments and your questions here. We've had up to 35 people on board here thus far. So hello to everyone out there. So David, since Bama closed out Clemson 45-40, we've had a number of Tennessee's players who have been able to move on to the NFL, opt to stay in Knoxville. We've had coaching shakeups with, of course, Will Muschamp taking the job at South Carolina, bringing in a new staff. Kirby Smart having to figure out the national championship game plan against Deshaun Watson, but keep his eye on Athens, and now transitioning to Georgia. So what's pretty much caught your eye in regards to piquing your interest about moving forward to 2016?
That we know, I think for sure Tennessee will probably be the pick in the when it comes down to SEC Media Days to pick to win the East. And we knew they were bringing back a ton of players, but there were some juniors that they were, kind of iffy on of whether they would come back or not. So now Jalen Reeves-Maben and Cam Sutton have announced they're going to come back, and that really, I think, leaves to where five starters are all Tennessee's losing off of this coming year's team, and who went on a late season streak to and beat a Big Ten team very impressively in a bowl game to set up for a big run in 2016. We know Josh Dobbs is definitely by far going to be the most experienced and best quarterback coming back in the East. Jalen Hurd right there along with probably top 2, 3, 4 running backs in the SEC. So Tennessee, they got the ball rolling. We're going to see if the early season struggles that crept up this past year with Butch Jones coaching in late in games, see if that rears its head. I don't think it will. I think he probably will learn his lesson. That was probably part of, him coming in the SEC. While he had some experience, this is a different conference. The mistakes would definitely show up. But I think he has the train rolling. But and it's going to be interesting to see, the quarterback situations, coaching situations at Florida, Georgia. Mainly the quarterback situations for both of those teams. There's the only two teams that probably will give Tennessee a run. So that's definitely going to be what to look out for in the East with Tennessee, Florida, and Georgia. But Tennessee, with all their returning starters, most experienced quarterback coming back, definitely sets up for a big run in 2016.
Dave, you know what I love to do this time of year? I love to compare the conferences. So I'm still working on the metrics here. And I think if Chad and Mike were on, they might be rolling their eyes. But you're usually a pretty good sport about it. But I love comparing the conferences. And so if you just go with the seedings, I'm not saying these are the best 1 through 14 in the SEC, but if you just go with the seedings, and how I see them in the SEC would be that you go by conference record, and then you go head-to-head, and then you go overall record, and this is how it plays out. Now, again, I'm not saying your Florida Gators are the second-best team in the SEC, but that's how it came out at 7-1. So you got Bama at 1, Florida 2, Ole Miss 3, Arkansas 4, LSU 5, Tennessee 6, Georgia 7, Texas A&M 8, Mississippi State 9. That's a really good 9 to start out with. I think that pretty much runs the gamut across the country. Auburn at 10, Vandy at 11, who had a nice season for considering what 2014 looked like. Kentucky at 12, Mizzou at 13, dropping all the way to 13, and South Carolina at 14. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run all the results of the seedings versus the other conferences, look at all the results between the Power 5 conferences played. And so, for example, Florida's a 2, Michigan's a 4 in the SEC or in the Big Ten. So that's kind of a not the best of losses for the SEC right there. But of course, the SEC made up for it with 3 big wins against the Big Ten and 9-2 in the postseason play. So I think, before I go through all the metrics, I think that I know where this is headed. Where last year it was a
right.
little mess in terms of figuring out based on just the Power 5 results against each other, how this was going to turn out. And actually, once I ran all the metrics, I'm not saying the Pac-12 was the best conference last year, but they played the best against the other conferences. They went 13-6, and they were lower seeded teams beating higher seeded teams in other conferences. But I think it was very even, and it was going to be difficult to determine until postseason play in the SEC really distinguished itself. So besides,
so you are going to count regular season results in that and stuff as well.
Yeah, regular season and postseason. I'm still trying to work out a way to get the other non-conference, the group of 5 involved, but that's going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'm just measuring results against each other. So that should be interesting. I think
the craziest one out of that is having to go all the way back to week 1 and looking at and looking at South Carolina beating North Carolina.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
That's great. I don't know, boy. I tell you, and I would not want to tell my ACC bloggers when I do that show on Wednesday night. I don't know if they played tomorrow, David, if it would be – I think it would be a game again. Look at South Carolina against Clemson.
Right. I mean, they played Florida. They played Florida tough at the end of the year as well. I mean,
there's a difference between those two conferences.
Yeah. I do remember that game. Of course, it was the first game of the year, and North Carolina had their yards, and it was just, I think, 2 red zone interceptions that kind of did them in on that game. So, but yeah, you're right. It was a weird comparison there.
Yeah, so that's always fun to do, and of course we got recruiting. We've got National Signing Day coming up the first Wednesday. So David and I soon will be sitting down talking some Florida Gators. And then after signing day, when we know who's all signed and sealed, we will revisit the group and see how the Gators do. And I've got a number of videos set up. So if you want to join me on Mark Rogers TV on YouTube, I've got all sorts of college football recruiting videos. I've already knocked out the Big Ten West, Nebraska, and Minnesota. And I've got a number of individuals lined up, including David with Florida, but also Auburn, and all over the country with recruiting videos lined up to break it down, because this is when – and it's one thing, David, when the season gets rabid and fired up and people are fired up. I think they get more fired up about recruiting and wanting to have that number 1 recruiting class.
Yeah, and in the SEC, I think I was looking at, I believe it was 24/7. It was one of the recruiting services, and 6 of the top 10 classes were from the SEC. So it's, it's a cycle that runs. Most of the, high school talent is down here in the South. Florida, Georgia being your main 2, states teams want to try and come and recruit from. But that's part of the reason the SEC stays up to the top near the conference race, is because a lot of the high school talent is down here, and we'll see. That's probably going to be the most important parts, and why Georgia went with Kirby Smart and South Carolina went with Will Muschamp. There were 2 big recruiters there that will, try and keep the ball rolling for their schools.
David, anytime I hear that recruiting is a crapshoot and that these recruiting rankings don't mean anything, I shake my head. I got to correct that, because, any individual, that's a crapshoot. A 5-star could bomb out. We got 2 stars that are in the NFL. Yes, any individual, but the numbers across the board. I even saw a pretty good breakdown of 5 stars going down to 4, 3, and 2 stars translating to the NFL. And it's uncanny, the number of 5 stars that make it to the NFL. The percentage is extremely high. Then 4 stars come down. It's still rather strong. And then 3 stars, it's hit or miss. And it runs the perfect curve that the recruiting rankings actually translate all the way through 3 to 4 years of college, all the way to the NFL, and it's pretty accurate. And there's a reason why Alabama and LSU and Ohio State and Florida State have, and there's a few others mixed in there, of course, the top recruiting classes, and then they're the ones that are only losing 1 game a year and competing for national championships, because the numbers over the course of time say, hey, you got a top recruiting class, it's generally going to work out. And kudos to Wisconsin and Michigan State for making it happen with recruiting classes of 30 and 35 and still playing elite football. That's amazing, but that's tough to do over time. And we see it where Michigan State's even grabbing some top recruits, and their recruiting classes are getting up there in the top 10 or 12. And look out for Penn State as well. They're a comer. But we would hear Spurrier say it almost every year. He'd be like, poor me, I'm 20th in the nation, but I'm 10th or 11th in the SEC in recruiting. It's just brutal, and it is. It's unbelievable.
You're right, and like you said, you look at the teams winning national championships, and there's other teams that are near the top of the recruiting rankings. It's not a coincidence. But near and dear to my heart, Florida. Coaching is a big part of it. Ron Zook had no problem recruiting here at Florida. Couldn't win. Will Muschamp really didn't have much of a problem recruiting here at Florida. Couldn't win. So it is definitely a combination of both. But you're right. If you're part 1 is getting the players coming in. That's and we see it, like you said, Ohio State's winning national championships. They're top 5 recruiting. Alabama's winning national championships, top 5 recruiting. When Auburn was winning national, in a national championship and winning a national championship, very high in recruiting. It's just the lifeblood of college football. You got to get these players in and get them coached up.
So we're going to hang on here for just another minute. If anybody wants to take the seat, ask us a question concerning SEC football, or make a comment, certainly jump on board. Otherwise, we're going to wrap things up. And just to remind you that the SEC breakdown comes your way. At this point, it's going to be 4 o'clock Eastern time on Sundays. We're still looking for that sweet spot in regards to scheduling for David and myself, and also Chad Neipling from Fox Sports Arkansas, and also Mike Loveall from Last Word on Sports. They'll be joining us each and every week as we crank this up at least once a week, maybe twice. There's so much talk about SEC football, so much to cover. We may go at this twice a week, but you can find the completed posted version on my channel at Mark Rogers TV on YouTube. So go right there. And if you want to watch and listen to college football analysis and debate and insight, have at it, because last year we posted more than 700 college football videos with the likes of David Waters and a number of other bloggers and broadcasters across the country. So if anybody wants to take a seat, please do. Otherwise, I believe we're going to sign off for this SEC breakdown. Again, keep track of us on Twitter. You can find David at, you see it right there, GatorDave_SEC. I'm at Mark Rogers TV. Also, again, Mike Loveall at Mike L_LW, last word on sports, LWOS, and Chad Neipling of Fox Sports Arkansas at SEC_Chad. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we will catch you soon. David, of course, we always appreciate it, and we'll do this again soon.
We'll do it again.